My name is Lucas Mendonça. I'm 23 years old, and this is exactly the kind of attraction you spend years learning to deny, until it decides to speak for itself. Exactly 1 year ago, I was inside a tent, in the dark, next to a man I had known for 7 years and didn't know at all. And in that darkness, he said something. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't anything you'd see in a movie. It was something more honest than that, and more frightening. It was one of those things that, once said, can never be unsaid. It shifts the geometry of everything around you, rearranges every memory that came before, and leaves you with the feeling that you'd been assembling a puzzle blindfolded, and someone just switched on the light. Have you ever been somewhere like that, where someone you'd learned to keep at a safe distance is suddenly right beside you, in the same small space, no way out and no excuse, and you realize the distance you built over years was inside you, not between you? I lay there listening to the sound of the river outside. The campfire had already died out. Felipe was asleep in the hammock outside, completely oblivious to what was happening 2 meters away from him. And I realized I had spent 7 years preparing for a moment I thought would never come. His name is Rogério Carvalho. He's 46 years old. He's my best friend's father. He manages a farm in the interior of Minas Gerais, and he was the first person in my life who made me understand that the heart doesn't consult logic before deciding where to settle. I'm not going to tell you this story in a straight line, because it didn't live that way inside me, and it wouldn't be honest to tell it that way. I'll tell it the way it lives in my memory, with the smells, the silences, the choices I didn't know I was making, and the ones I knew about and made anyway. But before we get to the tent, before we get to the night that silence turned into words, you need to know how it all began. Because what happened at that campsite didn't come from nowhere. It was born from 7 years of a distance I learned to call caution, but which was never anything other than fear. And to understand that fear, I need to take you back to the beginning, to a summer afternoon on a farm in the interior of Minas, when I was 16 years old and didn't yet know how much that day would shape everything that came after. Come with me back to the summer I was 16, because that's where it all begins. Felipe Carvalho had been my best friend since 5th grade. We had grown up 2 blocks apart in Carmo das Pedras, a small town in the interior of Minas, where everyone knows their neighbor's name and their family's history. Our friendship was a chemistry that needed no explanation. It simply existed, like the heat of January or the sound of the fountain in the town square. That summer, he invited me to spend the weekend at the family farm. I had never been before. I knew it existed. Felipe talked about the farm sometimes, about working with his father, about how he woke before sunrise to help with the cattle. But it had never occurred to me that I'd be invited. The Carvalho farm was Felipe's private world, the place that shaped who he was before me. I went thinking it would be a simple visit, that it would be a weekend like any other. I didn't yet know what I was going there to find. The Carvalho family's property was about 30 minutes from town, down a dirt road that rattled the car from start to finish and left a layer of dust on the windows that was nearly impossible to ignore. When we arrived and I stepped out with my backpack, the first smell that hit me was wet earth and grass. The sun was still high, striking at an angle, with that solid texture of a Minas summer, that thick heat you feel in your chest before you feel it on your skin, as if the air had a weight of its own. Felipe went ahead, as always, explaining things while tossing his own backpack on the ground. It was a large, lived-in place, with that organized clutter typical of somewhere that is truly inhabited. Tools leaning against the right wall. Mud-caked boots by the entrance with yesterday's and the day before's dirt layered on top of each other. An old dog that barked once and went back to sleep without waiting for a response. I was still getting my bearings when I heard the sound of the tractor. Rogério Carvalho came from the direction of the barn, hands dirty up to the elbows, no shirt, with the expression of someone who had been thinking about something else and only stopped because the work was done, not because he wanted to stop. He was, I calculated later, much later, when I had reason to calculate, around 39 years old at the time. Broad shoulders, the posture of someone who has been carrying heavy things for so long, he stopped noticing the weight. Unshaved, not as a style choice, but as a consequence of priorities, and a low voice that reached us before he did. Felipe. Just that. One syllable containing greeting, acknowledgement, and authority all at once. Felipe went to his father with the ease of someone who does that every week, which was the truth. They exchanged 2 sentences I didn't catch. Rogério looked at me. I froze. You know that feeling? Not the paralysis of shame. Not exactly that. It's more like when you see something you weren't expecting, and your brain needs an extra second to process it, to reorganize what it's seeing into some category that makes sense. I was 16, and still didn't know how to properly name what I felt about men. I knew something was there. There was a different weight in certain situations, a warmth that appeared uninvited. But I lived in a small town, in a family that left no room for those subjects, and I had learned early on to push it all to the bottom. In that second, the bottom went shallow. Is this Lucas? Rogério asked Felipe, but looking at me with that direct gaze of someone who has no time for indirect conversation. It is. Felipe smiled. The Lucas I told you about. Rogério extended his hand. I shook it. His hand had calluses in specific places, the exact points where the hoe, the handle, real work leaves its mark. He let go before I knew it was time to let go. Welcome. Just that too. And he walked past both of us toward the house, carrying the smell of sweat and machine oil, and I stood still for a second that lasted longer than it should have, before following Felipe inside. At that dinner, I learned the rhythms of that family. Rogério at the head of the table, saying little, but present in a dense way that needed no volume. When he asked a question, the table went quiet to hear the answer. Felipe and his mother, Dona Chida, shared the vocal space with that domestic intimacy that takes years to build. I ate more than I needed to because I didn't know what to do with my hands when I wasn't holding my fork. At some point, Rogério asked me a question. Direct, simple, something about school, about what I wanted to study. I took a second too long to answer. It wasn't embarrassment. It was that specific second when the brain and the mouth need to resync after something throws you off course. Like when a flash of light passes too quickly across your field of vision and you blink. Rogério noticed. His eyes lingered for a moment, not with overt curiosity, just with attention, and then returned to his plate. I did what I had learned to do well. I looked away and pretended nothing had happened. That first visit was only the first of many. In the 7 years that followed, I went to the Carvalho farm more times than I can count. Weekends, barbecues, Felipe's birthday in August, which always had more meat than the whole family could eat. Holidays that my own home didn't know how to celebrate the right way. The farm became the second home that childhood sometimes distributes to those who need it, and I needed it more than I knew. With each visit, I learned to manage. That's the word. Manage. Because what I felt for Rogério Carvalho didn't disappear after that first time. It settled in with the patience of something that knows it has time. And I learned to live with it the way you learn to live with chronic pain. You don't cure it, you manage it. You learn the schedules, the triggers, the positions that don't hurt as much. I learned not to stand close when Rogério was working in the afternoon heat. I learned not to sit where I could see his profile during conversations on the porch. I learned there was a specific way to listen to him speak, with my back turned, or from a distance, or while pretending to look somewhere else, that made the wait manageable. That there were ways of being in the same space that didn't cost what other ways cost. I spent 7 years like that, managing. I was 18 when Felipe's mother died. Dona Chida went fast, a heart attack that gave no warning, an ordinary Tuesday that became something else before lunch. During the week of the wake, I went every day. I stayed close to Felipe, who was somewhere below anger and below grief, in that numbed place where great loss leaves people before the real weight arrives. The wake was full. All of Carmo das Pedras, filing through the room with ready condolences and rehearsed expressions. Rogerio stood the entire time, quiet, with that way of his, of holding everything inward, of processing in silence, and not letting anyone see the size of the hole that existed beneath his composure. On the second night, I stepped out for air in the hallway and found him outside the house, leaning against the wall, looking up at the sky that was dark and clear that night, full of stars the city never lets you see properly. I said nothing. He said nothing. We stayed there for a time I didn't measure, two men in a silence that carried a different weight from all the silences I had shared with him until then. Then he said, "You're a good friend to Felipe." I didn't know what to answer, so I didn't answer. He went back inside the house, and I stood there thinking that those had been the only real words we had ever exchanged in 2 years of knowing each other. Not an exchange of information, not social courtesy, but something that came from the place where true things are kept. At 19, I left for university. Uberaba, agronomy, the longest and shortest decision of my life at the same time. I distanced myself from Carmo das Pedras, from the visits to the farm, from Rogerio. I thought physical distance would resolve what emotional distance had never managed to. That time and kilometers would do the work that willpower couldn't. It didn't. Have you ever tried to put distance between yourself and something you were feeling, hoping time would do the work that willpower couldn't? I tried. 2 full years. That's not how it works. The feeling doesn't disappear. It just learns to wait better. I came back for the holidays, came back for the long weekends, and Rogerio Carvalho was exactly where I had left him. On the farm, in Felipe's eyes whenever his father did something that made him proud, in my head at the wrong moments, the moments when I wasn't paying close enough attention to defend myself. 2 years ago, I came back for good. Financial reasons. The scholarship wasn't renewed. The money ran out, and I needed to work before I could get back to finishing my degree. I returned to Carmo das Pedras with a suitcase and the sinking feeling of someone who'd been sent back 10 spaces in a board game without doing anything wrong. I started working at a local shop, helping with the books. I picked up the rhythm that college had interrupted, and I picked up the visits to the farm, where Rogerio Carvalho was exactly the same as always, as if the 2 years I'd spent trying to distance myself from him had never existed. It was on an April afternoon that the moment happened, the one that made me stop pretending. I was sitting on the farmhouse porch, waiting for Felipe to finish a job in the barn. The afternoon was settling slowly, that golden light at the end of the day that puts everything on pause, as if time itself were deciding whether it's worth moving forward. Rogerio came around the side of the house heading toward the field, in a shirt this time, his belt coiled in his left hand, with the ease of someone who never has to think about those movements, the posture of a man whose next step is already decided before the current one ends. He didn't see me, or he saw me and didn't acknowledge it. He passed, disappeared around the bend in the land, and I kept staring at that bend for too long. I was honest with myself in that moment, for the first time in a very long time. Without the usual rationalizations, without the It's just admiration, without the arguments I'd polished smooth from overuse. I had spent 7 years learning the accent of that man's movements, the way he shifted his weight to the left when he was tired, the way he listened, not with his head tilted the way most people do, but with his entire body reorienting slightly toward whoever was speaking. The way his silence had a different temperature depending on what he was holding inside. There was the silence of when he was satisfied with his work, and the silence of when he was carrying something heavy, and they didn't sound the same to anyone paying attention. I knew that man, in a way, he would never know, and would never know, because Rogério Carvalho was my best friend's father. He was 23 years older than me. He was a widower. He was straight. He was the kind of man who builds his entire identity around the things he doesn't do and doesn't feel. Rural masculinity as a second skin he'd put on so early, he'd forgotten it was clothing. So I folded that honesty back up, carefully, the way you close a drawer that should never have been opened. I waited for Felipe to finish the job. We went to get a beer. We laughed about something. I went home. I didn't act. I wouldn't act. Or so I believed, until 3 weeks before Felipe made the invitation that changed everything. 3 weeks before the camping trip, Felipe and I were sitting at Toninho's bar when he brought up the trip, with the same casual tone of someone commenting on the weather. "You're coming to the family campout this year." It wasn't a question. I looked at him over my glass. "What campout?" "Every year we go to the river, near my grandfather's property, that stretch of woods my dad's known since he was a kid. 2 days, 3 at most. You've never gone because we always kept it family only, but I want you to come this time." I didn't say anything for a moment. "Who's going?" "Me, you, and my dad. 3 people. Do you understand what happened in that fraction of a second before any words came out? The brain runs calculations you never asked for. The isolation, the 2 days without the familiar structure of the farm, the logistical impossibility of maintaining the distances I'd spent years learning to keep in a place with no walls to escape behind. Rogério, in a context outside his own territory, without the role of the man in charge, without the ritual of work to fill the space. I should have said no. "Why now?" I asked instead. Felipe shrugged, and there was something genuine in that gesture, something unguarded. "Because you're back. Because it's been a while since we've done something different. Because you're my best friend, and this is an important place to me, and I want you to know it." Felipe doesn't make speeches. When he explains the reason for something in more than one sentence, it's because the reason is real, and he wants you to understand it. That landed harder than it should have. "All right," I said. "I'll go." The following week, sorting things out for my pack, I tried to treat it like any other trip. Bug spray, sunscreen, swimwear. I made a list. I called my mom to tell her I'd be away for 2 days. She asked who with. I said Felipe and his dad. She said Rogério was a good person, and that getting out a little would do me good. And I agreed in the steady voice of someone pretending their heart isn't beating faster than it should be. It was the day before the trip that Felipe sent me a message. "Forgot to mention, my big tent broke. My dad's bringing his, which sleeps too. You two take the tent. I'll use my hammock. I actually prefer it." I read the message twice. I stood still for a moment with my phone in my hand, staring at that text with the focus of someone rereading a sentence to make sure they understood it right. The tent was a 2-person tent. Me and Rogério in the same tent, for 2 nights, at a campsite 2 hours from the city, in the middle of the woods, without the familiar structure of either of our territories. I closed my phone, went back to my backpack, zipped it up with more force than necessary, and I didn't sleep very well that night. The road to the campsite took 2 hours, just like Felipe had said. Rogério drove. Felipe in the front seat, as always when he's in his father's car. The natural right of the oldest child, even being an only child. Me in the back, with the window cracked open, letting the warm summer wind come in, while I tried not to look like what I was. A man counting the kilometers to a place he knew he shouldn't want to reach so badly. The conversation belonged to Felipe, as always. The route, what had changed on that road since last year, the story of a time the car got stuck in the mud right here. Rogerio answered when needed, corrected when Felipe remembered things wrong, drove with that kind of attention that doesn't seem like effort. I looked out the window. The campsite sat along the banks of a river. The forest closed in on both sides, and when we got out of the car and the silence of the city gave way to the different silence of that place, full of the sound of water, of birds, of wind through the leaves, of everything the city drowns out, I understood why Felipe kept that place close to his heart. It was beautiful, in a way that didn't need to be explained. The kind of place that existed before you, and will keep existing after, and that receives you in a neutral way, without expectation, without knowing where you come from or what you need. Rogerio unloaded things from the trunk with the same efficiency as always. He didn't ask for help, but didn't refuse when Felipe grabbed the food box. They knew how to do this. They'd done it dozens of times. They had their own language of movements, and I was the new element in the equation, trying to be useful without disrupting a rhythm that wasn't mine. "Do you know how to set up a tent?" Rogerio asked me, without looking up, the tent still folded in its bag. "I learned in college," I answered. He handed me the bag without comment. We set up the tent together. There wasn't much to say during the process. It was physical instruction, fittings, stakes in the ground, metal arches that need 2 pairs of hands to stretch out properly. Rogerio corrected with his hands when something wasn't aligned, without saying a word, the correction happening at the level of gesture. His large hands passed close to mine, and I kept my attention on the metal arch in front of me. The tent was finished. Rogerio stood up, gave the ceiling a flat-palmed slap to test the tension, the right sound, firm, not slack, and went to take care of the fire without another word. Felipe came back from the riverbank completely soaked, wearing the grin of a child who had just discovered water. "You have to see the water, crystal clear. We're going swimming tomorrow morning." That afternoon passed in a way I hadn't expected. Calmly. Felipe was Felipe in any environment, expansive, with no chosen silences, filling every space with stories and questions and commentary on everything he saw. Rogerio built the fire with the same focus he gave to any task, each step in its right place, and I settled into a space between the two of them, responding to Felipe's stories, watching Rogerio sideways without making it look like what it was. We ate dinner around the fire when the sun had fully set and the stars began appearing one by one, as if they needed enough darkness to feel safe. The meat Rogerio had been marinating since the day before. The smell drifting through the woods was almost unfair. Feijão tropeiro he'd made at home and brought in the pot, away from the city, away from the ranch's context, but with the same taste the ranch had. Flour. The kind of food that's better outside than inside, that only exists in this version when you're in the open air with fire below and sky above. The conversation came easy. Felipe told stories about camping when he was little, the fish his grandfather used to catch, the time he fell in the river with his boots on and came out with 1 boot full of water, weighing 2 extra kilos. Rogerio filled in the details Felipe had remembered wrong with his usual economy of words, not correcting because he needed to be right, but correcting because the story needed to be accurate. And then, at some point, Felipe said something funny, something about a snake that wasn't a snake, just a thick fallen vine, and the panic it caused one night when he was 10 years old, and Rogerio laughed. Brief, genuine, a laugh that rises from the chest without asking permission, that escapes before the face decides whether to let it or not. I had never heard that sound before. Not the closed smile I knew, not the restrained expression of approval. This was Rogerio Carvalho's laugh when he wasn't being anyone in particular, when he was just a man sitting near a fire, listening to his son tell a story he knew by heart. For a second, he was more real than in all the previous years combined. I looked down at my plate. Later, when the fire was dying down, and Felipe announced he was going to sleep with the certainty of someone who has no doubt about what their body needs, he stood up, wished us both good night with his easy smile, and went straight to his hammock with the ease of someone who treats sleep as a talent. Rogerio and I stayed for a few more minutes, saying nothing, listening to the fire slowly die. The embers pulsing orange, the river in the background, the space between the crickets. "Nice spot," I said, just to say something that wouldn't weigh heavy. "Yeah," he replied. And then, without another word, he got up and went inside the tent. I looked at the sky for one more minute. Without light pollution, the stars were different. Not the sky I knew from the city, not the sky through my bedroom window, but the entire sky, horizon to horizon, as if it had always been this way, and I was the one who had forgotten. I went inside the tent. The tent wasn't small, but it wasn't big either. There was room for 2 sleeping pads side by side, with about a foot between them. Reasonable for camping. Not reasonable for 2 men who had spent the last 7 years maintaining carefully drawn territory, with walls and schedules and roles as buffers. Rogerio was already lying on his back when I came in, eyes open, staring at the tent ceiling, with that stillness of someone who is quiet by choice, not by tiredness. He said nothing. I settled onto my sleeping pad, arranged my sleeping bag, took off my sneakers slowly, as if the noise mattered. Outside, Felipe was already snoring softly in his hammock, the peaceful sleep of someone with nothing unresolved. The silence of the forest at night is not the absence of sound. It is a layering of sounds the city erased. Crickets, frogs, the distant river with that constant murmur that exists without pause. Some animal moving through the foliage now and then. It has a texture of its own. You need time to learn to hear them without tensing up, to let them fill the space without interpretation. Rogerio turned off the lantern. The darkness closed in completely. I lay there staring at a ceiling I could no longer see. My pulse was racing in a way that had nothing to do with the physical effort of the day, which had been, objectively, a quiet day, with nothing to justify what was happening in my chest. I regulated my breathing with years of practice. Inhale through the nose, hold for a second, release slowly. The technique I learned more out of necessity than by choice. Rogerio lay quiet beside me, not the silence of someone sleeping, the silence of someone controlling something. I know the difference. I learned to know the difference through years of involuntary observation. The breathing of someone asleep has a regularity that gives way. It drifts, it doesn't strain. It has that quality of something no longer being managed. Rogerio's breathing was measured, contained, like someone monitoring a small fire from very close, knowing that any lapse changes the situation. Time passed. I don't know how much, probably less than it seemed, because time in the dark expands in ways the daylight doesn't allow. The river kept going. The crickets kept going. The fire outside had gone out completely. I was absolutely awake. Rogerio was absolutely still. Has anyone else been through this? Absolutely awake in thick darkness, beside someone you don't touch, but whose presence seems to press against your skin. Where the silence between 2 bodies has a density of its own. Where you can feel someone's warmth 30 centimeters away, without any contact. It was nothing. And it was everything. At some point, the control gave way. It wasn't gradual. It was the exact moment when sleep takes what wakefulness held onto. Rogerio shifted. His arm, which had been crossed over his chest with the firmness of a deliberate position, came loose. It slid to the side, into the space between the two sleeping pads, with the slowness of something that had let go before it was released, and stopped. It didn't quite reach me. It rested there, his arm in the space between us, fingers slightly open, palm facing up toward my side. I didn't move. I didn't breathe for what felt like a full minute, maybe more. An apnea that isn't physiological, it's purely emotional. Rogerio didn't wake up. He was asleep now. His breathing had changed completely, had given way, had that soft quality of someone no longer deciding anything. His arm had gone where his body wanted to take it, after his mind stopped keeping watch. And Rogerio Carvalho's body had wanted to place his arm between us. I stayed awake for hours. Not from anguish, more from that kind of necessary vigil that happens when something shifts inside you and you need to stay awake to follow the movement, to understand what just rearranged itself. The arm didn't go back. In the morning, I woke up first. The dawn light was already filtering through the tent fabric, that grey-pink light that makes no commitment to the day yet, exists only as possibility, enough to make out shapes. Rogerio was sleeping on his side, turned slightly in my direction, and his arm was still there, in the space between the two sleeping pads, his fingers less than 4 inches from my side. I lay still for a few more minutes, looking at that arm. At those hands I had known from so many distances, and never like this. Close, open, serving no purpose other than to exist. Then I sat up slowly, without making a sound, grabbed my sneakers, and slipped out of the tent with the care of someone leaving a place where something sleeps that shouldn't be woken. The river held the color of dawn, that blue-gray that lasts only a few minutes before the sun rises for good. Felipe was still sleeping in his hammock, his breathing steady and unbothered, having no idea the world had shifted 1 degree while he rested. I stood there, barefoot on the dew-wet grass, breathing that air that smelled of earth and water and early morning, trying to understand what to do with the weight that had woken up alongside me. I didn't know yet, but something had changed. On the second day, Felipe slept his afternoon nap like a religion. It was his ritual. I learned that day, after lunch, a hammock and sunglasses, and the world could stop and everything would be fine. He slept the way people sleep when they have nothing unresolved inside. Fast, deep, without tossing. The clean sleep of someone who put the workday in its proper place and now only needs to rest. Rogerio went down to the river in the early afternoon, when the sun was at its highest point and the heat had that heavy quality that calls for shade. I went after. It wasn't planned, or at least that's what I told myself. I grabbed a water bottle, told myself I was just going for a walk, and took the trail that led to the riverbank, the same one he had taken. I found Rogerio sitting on a flat rock that jutted slightly over the water, feet in the river, looking at the far bank with that quiet attention of someone seeing something other people glance at without noticing. He turned when he heard my footsteps. There was no surprise in his look, no disappointment. There was recognition, the kind of look that says he knew you were going to show up. "Water's nice," he said. I took off my sandals and sat on the rock beside him, let my feet slip into the water too. It was cold in a way that wakes you up from the inside, that rearranges your priorities immediately and welcomingly. We stayed in silence for a while, the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled, that exists in its own right, that carries the weight of the place and the hour, and the water passing constantly beneath 2 pairs of feet. Rogerio started talking about the river. Not dramatically, with that straightforward way of his, as if passing along useful information. The history of that place, when the Carvalho family had first started coming here. How his father had brought him when he was 6. How Felipe's grandfather used to fish for lambari here every week, with a makeshift rod and infinite patience. This place has 40 years of family in it, he said. My father taught me to swim in this river. There was something in that sentence that was more than memory. It was a confession from someone who wants to explain where they come from. Not just where they are, not just what they do, but where the version of you that exists before the roles and responsibilities came from. The conversation drifted with the ease of someone not steering, just following the current of whatever surfaced. At some point, Rogerio mentioned Chida, not with performative sadness, not the kind of mention that asks for a response or consolation, or that puts the listener in the position of knowing what to do. It was direct, the way he was direct about everything. He said she had loved that place, that in the early years of their marriage they would come together, that she liked to sit right where he was sitting now. That later Felipe came along, and the camping trip turned into a father and son thing, and she stayed home without complaining. She used to say she preferred imagining it to living it. A short pause, like someone rereading a memory. I never understood that at the time. And there was something in that last phrase, the at the time, that said more than the entire sentence. I listened. I said nothing. Rogerio kept looking at the water for a moment, at the current that never stopped, that had passed through this same place when he was 6, and when he was 20, and when Cida was alive, and kept passing now, without changing a thing. Then he said, "We make choices when we're young that shape everything that comes after. Sometimes, you don't even know you were making a choice. You thought you were just existing." He wasn't looking at me. He was talking to the river, to the far bank, to something that lay beyond what either of us could see from there. But I heard it, as if it were addressed directly to me. It was. Because I was 23 years old and felt exactly that way. Like someone who had spent 7 years making choices he called prudence, discretion, respect, without ever acknowledging they were choices with the full weight that word carries. That there had been another possible side to each of them. That every "I won't" had been an "I choose not to," that I never allowed to have that name. Have you ever stopped to think about that? That the things you choose not to do shape who you are just as much as the things you do? That silence also has a form, also has weight, also builds something you're going to have to carry? We stayed a while longer by the river. The shade shifted as the sun moved slowly across the sky. Rogerio said nothing more. I didn't ask. At some point he got up with that movement of his, someone who never lingers over goodbyes, lifted his feet from the water, put his sandals on. Felipe's probably up by now, he said. And he went, along the trail back to the campsite, leaving wet footprints on the rocks that dried quickly in the heat. I stayed a few more minutes on the rock, feet still in the water, feeling the current that asked nothing and expected no answer. Thinking about what he had said about choices. Thinking about the arm in the dark. Thinking that that night, something was going to be different, and that I didn't know if I was ready for what different meant, but that I was moving toward it anyway, with or without preparation. That night, neither of us went to the tent early. Felipe had been in the sun all day and had been complaining about exhaustion since dinner, and went to sleep before 9, with the certainty of someone who knows exactly what their body needs and doesn't hesitate to answer. He said goodnight to both of us with that easy lightness of his and disappeared into the hammock in a matter of minutes. Rogerio and I stayed by the fire. There wasn't much to say, but neither of us left. The fire had reached that stage where the main logs had already turned to embers, and the light was a low orange, almost reddish, a luminosity that doesn't illuminate, only warms. A smaller fire makes the surrounding space feel smaller too. It creates a circle of presence that the surrounding darkness makes denser. Up above, the sky was whole. No crescent moon that night, only stars from horizon to horizon, like a promise that doesn't know it's being made. I was poking at the embers with a stick for no particular reason, the movement of hands that need something to do, while the mind is somewhere else. Rogerio had his elbows on his knees, staring into the fire with the focus of someone using the flames to think. I don't know how long we stayed like that. You know those moments when time loses its linearity, when you're not waiting for anything or running from anything. You're just inside the moment, as if it were possible to stay there forever. That campfire was like that. That sky was like that. At some point, the embers grew too small to justify staying any longer. Rogerio stood up with the movement of someone who had made a decision without announcing it. I stood up too. We headed to the tent without coordinating it, like people going to the same place because there is no other place possible. The logistics repeated themselves. The sleeping pads, the sleeping bag, the shoes carefully removed. The lantern went out. The darkness came back. But this time, it was different from the very start. It wasn't the controlled silence of the previous night, that tense, monitored silence of two men pretending to fall asleep. It was the silence of two awake people who know the other is awake and are no longer pretending not to know. Rogerio lay on his back. Me too. The river had more voice that night. It had rained at the end of the afternoon for an hour, one of those summer rains from Minas Gerais that arrive without warning and leave with the same conviction, leaving the air cleaner and the water in more of a hurry. You could hear the difference, the extra force in the current. Some time passed, enough for the night to close in completely and the world to shrink to just that size. The tent, the darkness, the river outside, two men lying 30 centimeters apart who were not sleeping. And then Rogerio spoke, quietly, to the ceiling, not directly to me, to the space in general, to the darkness that makes everything a little more possible to say, like someone who doesn't yet know whether they're speaking or thinking out loud and chose not to decide. There's something I don't know how to pretend doesn't exist anymore. A pause. I'm not asking for anything. I don't know what I'm doing by saying this. But it seems like there comes a point when you get tired of carrying something just because it's easier than setting it down. The silence after that had a different texture than every silence I had shared with that man over the past 7 years. It was the silence after a bomb, not the destruction, but the moment when the sound ceases and the air still trembles. I was absolutely still. My chest was pounding with an absurd force, not from fear, or not only from fear. It was the arrhythmic pulse that happens when something you've spent years waiting for, without knowing you were waiting for it, finally moves. When the impossible recalibrates, and you realize it was just another word for unsaid. Rogerio said nothing more, and I understood it was my turn. It took me a few seconds, not because I didn't know what to say. I knew with the clarity of someone who had spent 7 years composing sentences that never found a destination, that lived as drafts. It took time because I needed a moment to accept that this time I was going to say it, that this time the draft would become real. I've been carrying this for 7 years, I said, in the same low voice, to the same ceiling. Since the first time I went to the farm, I learned to call it many different things over time, but I always knew what it was: silence. I never acted on it, because I thought it would always be impossible. A short pause. Not because I didn't want to. The river kept going outside. The crickets kept going. Felipe was sleeping 2 meters away from us, sunk in a deep sleep, trusting that the world would be intact when he woke up. Rogerio stayed quiet for a time I didn't measure, neither long nor short, the right amount of time for what needed to be processed. And then he turned his face toward me. In the darkness, I couldn't see clearly. It was only an outline, only the shape of a movement, the silhouette of a decision. But I felt it. I felt the weight of his gaze shift in my direction, and I felt that it was different from anything I had felt before, because this time, there was no calculated distance, no viewing angle of someone watching without being seen. And I turned my face toward him too. In the darkness, we looked at each other. There was no kiss. There was no touch. There was nothing that needed to happen beyond that. Two men in the dark, looking at each other without turning away for the first time in 7 years of carefully mediated companionship. I see you. It wasn't said in words, but it was said in the only way some things can be said, without sound, without gesture, only with the refusal to look away. Rogerio Carvalho, 46 years old, who spent his entire life building a mold of himself that he never quite fit into, who carried something that had no authorized name in the world where he grew up and in the world he had built, who chose silence not out of cowardice, but because it was the only choice that seemed possible for decades, was looking at me without turning away. And I, who knew the accent of his movements by heart, who had learned the specific weight of his silences, who had spent 7 years managing what I felt to protect a friendship and a man I thought would never know, I was seeing him back. The mask didn't fall all at once. There was no dramatic collapse, no revelation that rearranges everything in a single moment. It was a crack, 1 centimeter of opening in a wall that had been decades in the making. But it was real. It was irrevocable. It was enough for both of us to know there was something on the other side. For years, I thought courage would be the moment of action. That night, I discovered that courage is sometimes just the moment of not looking away. Neither of us looked away. Afterward, at some point, Rogerio turned his face toward the ceiling. Unhurried, without an abrupt retreat, just the natural movement of someone who has arrived where they needed to arrive and can now breathe. We stayed like that for a while longer, looking up, side by side, not touching, not needing to say anything more. The river kept flowing. The stars kept on beyond the fabric of the tent. Felipe slept 2 meters away from us, oblivious to everything, in the clean sleep of innocence that doesn't know it isn't ignorance. It's just a world not yet altered. When I finally slept, it was the sleep of someone who has set down something heavy after carrying it far too long and discovered their arms still work. On the morning of the last day, we broke down the camp. The process was the reverse of everything. The stakes coming out of the ground, the tent folding itself back down to the improbable size it had been before, the food box with the leftovers organized for the drive home. Rogerio led without needing to speak. Felipe helped with the carefree energy of someone who slept well and carries nothing that weighs on them. I folded my sleeping bag and tried to be normal. It was hard to understand what normal was now. Nothing had changed in the visible facts. I was breaking down a campsite with my best friend and his father, just as any other morning here could have been. But there was a new language between Rogerio and me, so new that I was still learning its alphabet, still learning which movements belonged to it and which belonged to the before. We made no plans. There was no need, and perhaps it wasn't yet possible. There are things that need time before they become words, that need to be carried a little while in liquid form before they solidify into conversation. There was a mutual, unspoken respect in the way we moved that morning, never fully ignoring each other, never drawing close in a way Felipe might notice as different. A choreography neither of us had rehearsed, which arose from the same place the words in the darkness had come from. When the bag was in the trunk, and the site looked more or less as we had found it, Felipe took one last look at the river before getting in the car. The look of someone memorizing out of habit, storing it away for next time. "Next year you're coming back," he said to me. A statement, not a question. "Next year I'll be here." I agreed. The drive back was 2 hours of Felipe talking. About the camping trip. About plans for the farm. About a mutual friend who had moved down south. About the team that had lost the previous weekend, by a score he considered unjust. Felipe's natural flow filling the space without realizing there are silences that need filling, and silences that don't. And that he, with the good fortune of someone who never had to learn that distinction, didn't know the difference. Rogerio drove, hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. Once, just once, in the middle of a sharp bend on the dirt road, he looked at me in the rearview mirror. It was quick. It lasted less than a second. It was nothing to anyone watching from the outside. It was everything to someone who understood what had happened the night before. We arrived in Carmo das Pedras in the late afternoon, with that golden light the town gets when the sun is at exactly the right angle and makes everything look older and better than it is. Rogerio stopped the car in front of my mother's house. The goodbye was the same as always, for the eyes that mattered. The goodbye Felipe saw. A wave. It was great. Let's talk soon. Felipe hugged me tightly, the way he always hugged, with that physical generosity of someone who has no reason to hold back. Rogerio stood by the car, while I grabbed my backpack from the trunk. When I straightened up, he was standing beside me, at a normal distance, the usual distance. "Take care." That was all. The simplest word in the world, spoken by a man who doesn't waste words, who chooses each one with the care of someone who knows that words cost something. "You too," I replied. And I went inside. I stood still in my room for a stretch of time I couldn't measure. My backpack on the floor, where I dropped it at the door. The afternoon light cutting through the window at a low angle. The sound of Rogerio's car engine pulling away down the street outside, growing quieter, disappearing. It had happened. Not a romance ending with a clean resolution and a declaration, and two men discovering that everything is going to be all right. What had happened was the only thing that, deep down, I needed to happen. The truth. Raw, bare, unpackaged, without guarantees. I hadn't been fooling myself for the past 7 years. It had never been just me. The next day, at 10 in the morning, my phone buzzed on the table. A message from Rogerio. Short, functional in appearance. The kind of message you'd send to an acquaintance after a trip. No apparent weight. Nothing that needed to be explained. Forgot to thank you for the help with the tent. I read it 3 times. I sat there with the phone in my hand, that text on the screen, and knew, with the same clarity with which I had known so many things about that man over the years, that it wasn't about the tent. We both knew it wasn't about the tent. And there was something in that gesture. Small, cautious, bearing the marks of a man who was still learning what was allowed, who was still mapping the new territory he had entered for the first time that night. That told me more than any direct declaration ever could have. He hadn't pulled away. We didn't yet know what that would mean, what would fit, what it would cost, what would need to be built with care. But we both chose to keep going, and sometimes that's what the real thing is made of. The mask had slipped, and he had let it. I replied, "Thank you for bringing me." And I lay there staring at the ceiling of my room, the same way we had stared together at the ceiling of the tent 2 days before, for the first time in 7 years, without the weight of an unspoken thing pressing against the space inside my chest. A year later, I'm here. I won't tell you every chapter of what came after. This story is still being written with the care that difficult stories demand, with the respect that both of us deserve. There are easy days and days that are anything but. There's the complexity of Felipe, who still doesn't know everything, and the weight that carries for both of us. There's Rogerio learning to unlearn decades of a mold that never fit right, and that's not fast, and it's not simple, and anyone who says it is either lying or has never been through it. But there is also what didn't exist before that camping trip, a shared truth between two men who spent far too long carrying the same weight in silence without knowing it. And if this resonates with you in some way, if there's something you also learned to call caution when it was really fear, then this story is for you too. And what I want to say to you, if you carry something similar, a feeling that seems impossible, an attraction that everyone around you would classify as out of the question, a love you learned to fold so it could fit into whatever space the world left for it, is that you don't need resolution to be real. You don't need a movie ending for what you feel to make sense. You don't need a label or a definition to admit that it exists. Sometimes what changes everything isn't the arrival. It's the moment you stop pretending you're not on your way. And if there are days when you still don't know how to hold all of this without losing yourself in the middle of it, that's okay. You don't have to be perfect at this acceptance. Nobody is. Have you ever felt something like this? A love that seemed impossible? An attraction you had to manage for years before you could look it in the face? A feeling that fit too poorly into the words you had available? Tell me in the comments. Every story you share here reminds me why it's worth telling mine. Reminds me that I'm not alone, and that maybe you don't have to be either. If this story touched something in you, leave a like. It helps enormously to keep bringing real, honest stories to you. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next ones. See you tomorrow. Love you, family.